Today, let's dive into a mystery that still lacks a solid explanation: the Khamar-Daban mountain incident. This is footage captured by the search and rescue team at the time, showing where they discovered 6 victims. Among them, 3 were clad only in thin underwear, and 2 were barefoot, looking as if they were fleeing from something terrifying. In this mountain tragedy, there was one fortunate survivor, but after her rescue, she vanished from public view entirely. It wasn't until 2019 that this survivor suddenly appeared on a television show, sharing the horrifying details from back then. Let's rewind to 1993. A group of young adventurers was gearing up for this hiking expedition. They set off from the southern shore of Lake Baikal, consisting of 3 guys, 3 girls, plus a female instructor leading the team. That made 7 in total. The leader was Lyudmila Korovina, 41 years old, an expert mountaineer. She'd earned the Master of Sports title from the Soviet Union. Korovina picked a route with a difficulty level of just 3, spanning over 230 kilometers and looping around half of Khamar-Daban. The challenge wasn't too intense, and on top of that, she'd started planning this trek 6 months earlier, so she knew the mountain conditions inside out. And just like that, on August 2nd, the squad headed out. At the same time, Korovina's 16-year-old daughter was guiding another group that departed as well. That team opted for a level 4 difficulty route, crossing the peak area of Khamar-Daban. Korovina arranged with her daughter that the 2 groups would meet up at Lake Padervoy in the mountains and then finish the rest of the journey together. Before entering the mountains, as was her habit, Korovina checked the weather forecast for the next 7 days. Everything looked normal. But not long after they ventured in, the group realized the forecast was way off. Rain started pouring down gradually. The team members had to pull out their raincoats and keep going. It wasn't a huge deal. At that point, each of them had carefully packed an extra dry sweater in their backpack, tucked inside a sealed waterproof bag. If the rain kept up and caused a sharp drop in temperature, they could pull it out to stay warm. And so, the whole team trudged through the rain for 2 days. On August 4th, they crossed the Langatai Pass and began climbing Mount Khan Ula, which stands at 2,371 meters. The group had to hike along the mountainside. By mid-morning, they'd reached an elevation over 2,000 meters. At that height, the forest had disappeared, and the slope was covered by a vast high-altitude meadow. The scenery there is absolutely stunning, but right then, the mountain rain was getting heavier, with thunderstorms rolling in. Heavy raindrops pelted the team members like bullets. They paused for a brief rest, but had to push on soon after, aiming to cross the slope quickly amid the storm. However, the muddy ground and strong winds still delayed their plans. By 4 p.m., the squad had made it to an elevation of 2,310 meters, practically the highest point on Mount Khan Ula. They just needed to press on a bit more to get over it, then descend and re-enter the forest. The trees in the forest wouldn't only shield them from the rain, more importantly, they'd block the wind. The current temperature was still around 10 degrees Celsius, but the fierce winds at the summit and their soaked clothes were sapping body heat. The team members' core temperatures were definitely much lower than 10 degrees C. From the 2,310-meter spot, they hiked another 6 kilometers until it got dark. At that moment, the instructor decided everyone would set up camp right there. They'd have to spend the night on the mountain. After all, it was summer, so the temperature wasn't too low. If they could tough out this night, they could descend in the morning. But at 4 a.m., powerful winds ripped the tents apart and rainwater flooded in. It wasn't until 6 a.m. that the wind finally died down. Everyone's sleeping bags were drenched. Some started vomiting. After a hasty breakfast, they packed up their gear. At 10 a.m. on August 5th, the whole team began descending. By then, snow was falling. The guys started complaining, saying they were wet and freezing and they couldn't spot any landmarks at all. The 3 young men were, in order, Alexander Krissin, 23 years old, a student at Moscow State Technical University. He'd been part of a climbing team since age 12 and was the strongest member of the group. Plus, He was someone the instructor Korovina had known since he was a kid. Not long before, he'd even proposed to her daughter. Korovina openly called her future son-in-law her son. Denis Shvachkin, 19 years old, wasn't originally on the roster. He stepped in because another kid's parents wouldn't let their child go. When he joined, his own parents were on vacation, so he hadn't gotten their permission. He just left a note saying, "I'm going hiking. I'll be back soon." Timur Bapanov, 15 years old, grew up in a family with a hiking tradition and was an active member of the climbing team. The three girls were, in order, Tatiana Filipenko, 24 years old, who'd just graduated and worked as an executive secretary at a pedagogical university. She loved hiking. Victoria Zelisova, 16 years old, had initially been turned down by instructor Korovina because last year, during a Tian Shan climb, she'd collapsed from exhaustion and lost her temper. Korovina didn't like members like that. But this time, Victoria was really keen on Mount Khan Ula, so she had her mom call Korovina and promised she wouldn't lose her cool again, which got her approved. The last girl was Valentina Utachenko, 17 years old, a student at Petropavlovsk Pedagogical University in Kazakhstan, majoring in tourism and sports. In the future, she might become a hiking instructor just like Korovina. In this group, nobody was a rookie. Even though they'd been soaked in rain for 3 days, as long as they descended according to plan, there shouldn't be any major issues. Suigi Trong 32s. But nobody could have anticipated that, right amid those complaints from the guys, death would strike suddenly. Alexander, the strongest one, tripped unexpectedly. After being helped up, he still staggered around unsteadily. Seeing something off about him, Korovina chose to stay behind alone to keep an eye on her future son-in-law, telling the others to go on ahead. Yet they hadn't gotten far when they all rushed back, drawn by the eerie screams from their instructor, Korovina and Alexander. By then, Alexander had begun foaming at the mouth and convulsing. Korovina called for everyone's assistance. Next, Tatiana set up a tent for shelter, while the rest pitched in to help. Valentina and the instructor monitored Alexander closely, but they watched in horror as blood started pouring from his nose. At the same time, his eyes bulged with terror, blood seeped from them too, his pupils dilated, and his face turned ghostly pale. Valentina noticed Alexander's body temperature dropping away, and right then, Korovina announced that his pulse was gone. No one expected death to arrive so abruptly, in just a matter of minutes. Everyone was stunned. But then, someone spotted Victoria, the one who'd always seemed fragile, collapsing onto the grass. The instructor told Valentina to help bring Victoria over to the shaded tent. However, as Valentina reached her, Victoria wildly bit into Valentina's arm. Valentina tried to call for aid, but when she turned, she saw over by Korovina that Tatiana was slamming her head against a rock, while Denis hid behind a boulder, burrowing into his sleeping bag. It was as if some unseen terror had gripped them all. Valentina hurried back to check on the others, only to find Korovina foaming at the mouth, just like Alexander, with blood streaming from every facial orifice. She nudged Timur nearby, but he was already motionless. Overwhelmed with fear and frozen in place, Valentina got kicked by Denis, who yelled at her to get down the mountain because the wind was fierce. Grabbing her backpack, Valentina scrambled and crawled, tumbling down with the wind's force. At first it seemed like Denis was following, but in the end, Valentina didn't see him make it down. Once in the forest, Valentina was terrified beyond words. In what felt like a blink, all her companions had fallen, and she wondered when the same fate might hit her. She put on her spare dry sweater, hunkered down in her sleeping bag, and somehow endured August 5th in utter dread. Early the next morning, Valentina climbed back up to check. Everyone remained in the same spots as the day before, foaming at the mouth, none alive. At the time, Valentina figured they'd all succumbed to pulmonary edema, but she didn't dwell on it. After gathering the compass and map from her teammates, she descended alone to seek help. Now, she trekked solo through the mountains for 4 days and nights. Though she followed the map to the Snezhnaya River, She still hadn't reached any settlements. By then, she was running a high fever, her lungs swelling with edema, coughing non-stop, struggling to breathe, and her mind growing foggy. Later, on a TV show, Valentina shared that she didn't want to die in such a filthy state. So she braved the fever to wade into the icy river, planning to clean up before facing the end. But at that exact moment, she spotted a kayak emerging from a bend in the river. Valentina shouted and waved her arms frantically. It turned out to be a group of tourists from Kiev, Ukraine, who rescued her. Meanwhile, on August 5th, Korovina's daughter's group had successfully reached Lake Sertse. The daughter waited there for 2 days, but when her mother and the others didn't emerge from the woods, she led her team onward. On August 18th, the daughter made it to the end point in Slyudyanka and immediately alerted rescue authorities. Due to weather issues, the helicopter didn't arrive until August 21st, and the rescue team only reached the site on August 24th. By that point, it had been 19 days since the incident on August 5th. Soon after, the forensic experts concluded that aside from Korovina, who died of a heart attack, the other 5 perished from hypothermia, what we commonly call freezing to death. Additionally, the autopsies revealed signs of malnutrition, with depleted glycogen in the liver and muscles, and deficiencies in multiple organs. Why did this happen? Back then, a few theories emerged to explain it. Hypothesis 1. Malnutrition. After the event, Yuri Zakharov, deputy director of the local search and rescue office, gave an interview. He'd known Korovina for years and described her as very strict. He recalled once meeting her on the north side of Lake Baikal, where she was descending with 2 16- or 17-year-old boys who looked exhausted. One of them could barely lift a knife for clearing paths. Zakharov invited them into his tent, and as soon as he offered tea and bread, the kids dove in like they hadn't eaten in days. He remembered Korovina telling him she planned to start a survival school, taking minimal clothes and food into the mountains to build the kids' willpower and character. Zakharov said he was furious hearing that. These were still teenagers. And at this incident's scene, he saw something similar. The rescuers thoroughly searched the campsite, but found only an empty can of stewed meat. Zakharov pointed out, "Imagine dividing 1 can of stew among 7 in freezing rain and snow up on the peak. That's brutal." During the search, he even hoped to find candy wrappers or chocolate packaging in the tents, but nothing turned up. In such harsh cold, with the group eating so little, it's no wonder they were malnourished. Zakharov's words seemed to perfectly back the official cause of death. But think about it. The rescuers only found 1 empty can at the site, which doesn't prove that's all they ate for breakfast. 19 days had passed by the time rescuers arrived, so it's entirely possible other food remnants were carried off by wild animals or blown away by strong winds. Media outlets tried to track down the survivor, Valentina, to learn about the group's diet, but she had vanished like she'd evaporated from the world. No one knew where she'd gone after the rescue. Hypothesis 2. Hypothermia. When rescuers located the 6 victims, 3 had torn off their own clothes, left in just thin underwear, and 2 were barefoot, appearing as if escaping some horror. To the public and media, this seemed bizarre and raised questions. That's when mountaineering experts spoke up. They explained that while it looks unusual, this matches the symptoms of hypothermia perfectly, known as paradoxical undressing. It occurs when body temperature drops below 32 degrees Celsius, disrupting the hypothalamus's temperature regulation center and sending false signals that the body is overheating. Under this misguided impulse, the hikers started stripping and acting erratically out of control. This paradoxical undressing has shown up in other mountain incidents. It's not rare at all. The experts' explanation seemed reasonable at first glance, but it didn't hold up under scrutiny. Back then, one of the rescuers raised doubts about what the specialists were saying. He pointed out that cases of paradoxical undressing are typically seen in winter, and they're pretty rare anyway. So it was unusual to find 5 people who all died from hypothermia and showed this exact symptom. After all, the tragedy happened in summer, and for a seasoned team like theirs, freezing to death just didn't make sense. Even after days of being drenched in rain with soaked clothes, the group could have easily saved themselves by starting a fire for just 20 minutes. No matter what, that would have turned things around. But why didn't they light one? On top of that, why not head down the mountain to camp? Even if exhaustion forced them to stay put overnight, there was a wind shelter marked on their map only 30 minutes away. Yet they didn't go there that night. Plus, everyone had a dry sweater packed in their backpack, but none showed signs of having been worn. Clearly, that suggests they didn't feel overwhelmingly cold. The team didn't believe spending the night up there would lead to fatal freezing. And honestly, the evidence backed that up. The rescuers found traces of breakfast at the site, meaning the group had eaten that morning before any signs of trouble appeared. That doesn't align with the hypothermia theory at all. Hypothesis 3. Food poisoning. So, could there have been something wrong with that morning meal? The survivor, Valentina, mentioned that along the trail, the whole group followed Korovina's instructions to gather a plant known as golden root, a rare herb that grows at high altitudes. The rescuers also spotted plenty of golden root in the victims' backpacks. According to Valentina, she herself survived in part by munching on golden root during the journey. What's more, the team's delay on the mountain was actually because they were busy collecting it. So, maybe while picking, someone accidentally mixed in a poisonous mushroom. Then, when they cooked the golden root that morning, the toxic fungi got thrown in too, causing mass poisoning. That would explain the behaviors the survivor described, like bashing heads on rocks or biting wildly. But obviously, this idea doesn't stand up either. For starters, Korovina herself was an expert in herbs. She wouldn't have let the group eat anything deadly. Plus, Valentina ate from the same pot for breakfast, so why wasn't she affected? Hypothesis 4. A shaman's curse. This theory came from Yuri, one of the rescuers. First off, he noted that Korovina's and the others' backpacks were stuffed with golden root, which might have been intended for sale after the hike. That kind of action clearly disrespected the local people's beliefs. The area is home to the Buryat people, an ethnic Mongolian group who follow Tibetan Buddhism and shamanism. They view golden root as a sacred plant, not something to greedily harvest. On top of that, Khamar-Daban means terrifying ridge in the local Mongolian language. Originally, it referred to a small mountain range along Lake Baikal's shore. In ancient Hunnic times, this spot served as a sacrificial altar, slicing through 2 plains by the lake and plunging straight into Baikal. So, Khamar-Daban has never been seen as a picturesque tourist spot by locals. Moreover, Khan Ula Peak, where the group met their end, is considered an especially unlucky demon mountain. Legend has it that long ago, an ancient Khan, cornered and desperate, took his own life there in the most feared way among steppe nomads, by letting his blood drain drop by drop until he was empty. The nomads believe the soul resides in the blood, so this meant the Khan rejected reincarnation, dooming his ghost to haunt the peak forever. Locals revere and fear this mountain, refusing to casually pick plants from it no matter what. Yet, Korovina and her team did just that, and harvested so much, it delayed their descent. Valentina recalled how the heavy rain suddenly turned into a thunderstorm on the mountain, which in Mongolian shamanic beliefs is seen as a shaman's curse. Could the group have truly encountered some mysterious natural force? Interestingly, others have proposed similar ideas. Hypothesis 5. Nerve agent poisoning. This is an urban legend that captivates a lot of people who follow the case. Based on Valentina's account of foaming at the mouth, convulsions, and bleeding from eyes and nose, it mirrors the effects of an old Soviet nerve toxin, including Korovina's cause of death being cardiac arrest, which fits as a side effect. This agent, called Novichok, was developed by the Soviets starting in 1971, and production halted in 1993. Believers point to evidence suggesting the final tests before shutdown happened right in the Khamar-Daban range. So, did Korovina's team stumble into a testing site? Obviously, there's a big flaw here. Khamar-Daban isn't some uninhabited wilderness, especially in August during peak tourist season. The military wouldn't conduct experiments in such a busy time and place. Plus, this doesn't explain why Valentina was spared. But later, enthusiasts uncovered another clue. The toxin dissolves in water and takes at least 4 months to fully degrade in nature. That means the military's test timing and location didn't have to match the hikers exactly. It's possible tests occurred months earlier, and heavy rains washed residual toxin to their campsite. Then, with the morning sun, it evaporated, poisoning the group. Since the vapor rose from the ground and grass, Alexander might have been first because he fell. Perhaps rolling around exposed him to higher concentrations. The others around him followed suit. As for Valentina escaping unharmed, maybe it's because Korovina sent her to help Victoria, who fiercely pushed her away, keeping Valentina on the move during the outbreak. That might have distanced her from the ground enough to avoid deep exposure. Similarly, Dennis wasn't hit as hard at first, but by hiding behind a rock and burrowing into his sleeping bag, he inhaled more fumes quickly. By the time he kicked Valentina downhill, he was too poisoned to follow. This speculation has 2 indirect supports. First, why did Valentina disappear after rescue? Did she sign a non-disclosure with security agencies? Second, after the report on August 18th, why the delay until the helicopter flew on August 21st and rescuers reached the site on August 24th, wasting 7 days? Was someone waiting for the toxin to dissipate? Clearly, this lacks any objective evidence. It's just an urban myth. But what really happened? Surprisingly, after 26 years of silence, in 2019, when survivor Valentina and Korovina's daughter appeared on TV, they shared an even stranger new tale, the new story. In 2019, after hearing Valentina's account, the investigative reporter watched as she stood and pulled an old string of prayer beads from a cabinet. Valentina explained that a local rescuer gave it to her after she was brought to safety in Slyudyanka, and only then did she feel truly saved. She believed it represented some reconciliation between humans and nature. Valentina also clarified that Korovina wasn't harsh at all. The daily rations were carefully calculated, and no one in the group resented her. Plus, before setting up camp on the mountain, they tried to start a campfire, but couldn't, forcing them to endure the cold night. It was freezing, with tents torn and sleeping bags soaked through. Then, Korovina's daughter shared in her interview that before the groups set out, locals had warned them the mountains were acting strangely that year. A bear had been roaring and slamming into power lines, even trying to block an oncoming train. Once in the mountains, the daughter kept spotting a massive elk watching them the whole way. She even detoured her group to the forest edge because of this elk, delaying them nearly a full day. Sure enough, when they entered the valley, they found it littered with fallen trees from a recent landslide. If they hadn't rerouted, they might have been caught in it. Later, Korovina's daughter often dreamed of that elk and always believed it had saved her back then. Astonishingly, in their first public statements after 26 years, they spun a nature legend even more captivating than the nerve agent myth. So, to this day, the Khamar-Daban incident remains unsolved. It shares many similarities with the 1959 Dyatlov Pass event in the Ural Mountains, earning it the nickname Russia's second Dyatlov Pass. Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested, subscribe to catch future videos. Or if you have time, check out other content on this channel.